These thoughts might be controversial, but I'm just going to go ahead and say it. There are some things that you should and some things that you just shouldn't say on your podcast. Welcome to another episode of Listeners to Leads, where I'm helping podcasters launch and maintain a lead generating show. I'm your host, Alicia Galati, the CEO and head podcast strategist behind Galati Media, a full-service podcast management company. On this show, you'll hear my guests and I discuss everything it takes to launch a successful podcast and keep it running. If you're ready to get leads, land speaking gigs, and create deeper connections with your audience through your podcast, then this is the show for you. All right, story time. I have a friend who she had been on someone's podcast. They had shared about her services with another friend of theirs, and there were some emails going back and forth, and it just never connected, right? So this potential client that was supposed to connect with my friend just wasn't responding to the emails. And then my friend was listening to the host's show, and the host had that person on their podcast and then used this example, which the person didn't have all of the information about, to bash my friend's business and say, oh, well, she probably didn't do XYZ, or she probably was feeling nervous about connecting with you when she had sent multiple emails and this other person did not have all of the information. Obviously, this left my friend feeling frustrated and also put out. This podcast host had shared her business name, had shared who she is, what her name is, and made it seem like she was not a good business owner. Obviously, I was mad on her behalf, as anyone would be, right? And it made me think about this topic of what should and what shouldn't be said on a podcast. Our clients tend to work with us because they know that we are going to go into their podcast and take out everything, not everything, but everything that does not align with their values, everything that is maybe not putting them in a good light or putting the guest in a good light. So we edit for content. Most podcast producers and podcast editors are only going to edit for the false starts, for the fumble of over some words, for the ums, the ers, and the likes. Those are the things that people typically edit for. Whereas we will go through, we promise that we will listen to every word, and we'll actually take out the things, the jokes that just don't land right, the side tangents that make absolutely no sense to the conversation, and things like that. Now, what we're doing is we're editing it down to create a concise and clear message that our clients are excited to share and that the guest is excited to share because they come across as really professional. This is something that we've seen a lot of in podcasting. Obviously, there is no one out there saying there are things that you can and cannot say on a podcast. This is not national TV. This is not a producer who is backing you and putting money into your show. It is you saying what it is that you want to say. And in podcasting, there are shows that are extremely controversial, as well as light and fluffy and entertaining ones that the jokes can be kind of raunchy. But the thing that really sets podcasting apart from all of the other mediums of content, and a lot of the other mediums, I would say blogging is another one that can't really be touched that much, except through your host sometimes. That's a whole other thing. But most of the other mediums, these platforms can say, hey, you go against our rules and regulations, and we are going to take down your content because it does not align with our values. There has been some push in podcasting to not allow podcasters to have that space to talk about what they want to talk about, to be themselves in their podcasting space, to have more regulation on what is said. So obviously that is not something that we want. What I love about podcasting is that freedom of voice, that anyone can pick up a microphone or speak into their phone if that's what they're going to do and share their message with the world and make a difference in the world. But there are some things that you probably shouldn't say. So let's go through a few of those. The first is identifying information. When I share stories, I will use broad information about these people where only someone who knows this person and knows this story would be able to put two and two together. It makes sense. So that way, if I do say something that paints them in a not so fun light, it makes it so that I don't come across as a jerk. Because obviously I'm not trying to be a jerk. And I'm not saying that this guy who talked about my friend was intentionally being a jerk. But by giving this identifying information, he could have caused, and he could cause, some serious harm to my friend. Business harm, right? Like, that's not cool at all, especially since she didn't do anything wrong. And he was not even in the conversation except to initiate it. That was it. That is where his step ended. So for him to share her identifying information, that's a no-no. So as business owners, let's make sure that we're not doing that, because it comes across as really rude, quite frankly, and can cause harm to someone else, which obviously we don't want to do that. Another story, because there's always a story on ways that we can accidentally do things that can cause harm to other people. I have a client where she was sharing a story about one of her clients, and she was so excited to share this story about how this person had set some incredible boundaries with a friend and had talked through this coaching of whatever it was that they were working through, right? I'm giving very broad descriptions here because this is not my place to share names or minute details, because obviously my clients trusted me to be able to keep this information between us. And so what this client needed was us to go back in after an episode was already produced and created. And they said, oh no, the client listened to the podcast and I didn't even think that this was going to be a problem, but they asked me to take this part out because the information that I gave was too identifying. Even though I had given broad ideas, even though I had given general concepts of this, they felt like, oh, that's me, and someone else might know it's me. And so obviously they wanted to not make their client feel weird or uncomfortable. And so they took it out. So don't put any identifying information, especially when you're giving examples or stories about people who are struggling, people who are working through things, or when people are having interactions with other people, especially if you may not be involved with those interactions. It's really, really important. So don't give that identifying information. The other thing that I want to make sure that we are not doing is giving mis or disinformation in our podcast. Now, if you know anything about Joe Rogan's podcast, which love it or hate it, it's still one of the top performing podcasts in the world. He gets hit with this quite a bit, where he just has someone on and they talk about their information. They talk about their stories and their journeys. And sometimes that information may not be correct. And so people try to push against that when he's just sharing his story, right? But I think as podcasters, especially as business owners, it's important that the information that we're giving out is clear, concise, and validated information, that you can find sources and cite your sources on where you're finding that information. Now, that is misinformation, where you do not mean to intentionally give information that is incorrect. Disinformation, which I would hope that no one is at all doing, is where you are intentionally giving incorrect information to your audience. This is something that we have, as a collective, I would say, felt that the news sources have done in the information that they're giving and the things that they spin and like to spin in the information that they're giving us, where it's not the whole picture, and it tends to come across as disinformation since they are intentionally leaving certain things out or phrasing things a certain way in order to sway our beliefs and how we see things. With that in mind, I think it's really important that with podcasting as a medium, that we are giving our audiences information that is valid, that has been validated, and that we are citing our sources as a place of just ethical podcasting, right? There's been a shift in turning the tide of podcasting and wanting to make it more free range for people, where they're able to access it. They're able to, anyone can podcast, anyone can start a podcast. And obviously that gets me really excited. And I love that concept. And I want to make sure that we are creating space for anyone, that it is not just a place where people who look a certain way or talk a certain way or speak a certain language are the only people who have voice. So this is my public service announcement of what you should and what you probably shouldn't say on your podcast. Let me know what your thoughts are. Send me a DM, drop something in the comments if that is something that you're interested in doing. Let me know what your thoughts are on this topic, because obviously there are going to be differing opinions and I welcome those, especially when it comes to some controversial stuff of whether you should or shouldn't do something. Until next time, happy podcasting. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Listeners to Leads. If you found something in this episode valuable, I would really appreciate it if you shared it with a friend who you know would also get value from it. Want to send me a message? My favorite place to hang out is Instagram. You can find me at alicia.galati. Let me know what your favorite takeaway was from the episode. And don't forget, turning those listeners into leads is actually easy.